4 countries, a combined $312 billion in proposals, pipelines, and engineering studies. Every single one either failed, stalled, or barely made a dent. And the world's most dangerous energy choke point is still exactly where it was. I want to tell you why. Not the version you've heard. The mountains are hard, the politics are complicated, the cost is enormous. All of that is true, but none of it is the real reason. The real reason is something nobody who covers this story ever wants to say out loud. Stick with me, because by the end of this, the way you think about Hormuz will be completely different. Act 1. The stakes. On a Tuesday morning in March 2026, a shipping insurance broker in London woke up to a phone call that changed his week. A single incident near the Strait of Hormuz, not a closure, just a threat, had pushed the war risk premium on oil tanker insurance to levels not seen in years. He didn't need to check the news. He just watched the number and knew the world was nervous again. This happens with a regularity that should disturb you, not just in 2026. It happened in 2019 when tankers were seized and attacked. It happened in 2012 when Iran threatened to close the strait entirely. It happened in 2011, in 2008, in 1987 during the tanker war, when American warships were escorting oil through the same water we're still arguing about today. Here is what the strait actually is. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide. The actual shipping lanes, the channels ships must use, are just 2 miles wide in each direction, with a 2-mile buffer zone between them. Through those 4 miles of water, roughly 20 million barrels of oil move every single day. That is 1/5 of all the oil the entire world uses. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE. Almost every barrel these countries produce exits through this single gap. To put that in scale, shut Hormuz for 30 days, and you remove more oil from global markets than the entire strategic petroleum reserve of the United States could replace. Every economy on Earth feels it within a week. Fuel prices, shipping costs, food prices, manufacturing slowdowns. The ripple from one narrow strip of water reaches every grocery store, every gas station, every factory floor from Tokyo to Texas. So the question that engineers, strategists, and governments have been asking for decades is a completely reasonable one. Why not build a bypass? Why not remove this single point of catastrophic failure from the global economy? Here is where the story gets complicated and honest. Act 2. The attempts. Attempt 1. The UAE pipeline. In 2012, the United Arab Emirates completed what it called a strategic masterstroke, a 380-kilometer pipeline running from its inland oil fields at Habshan all the way to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, completely bypassing Hormuz. Cost $4.2 billion. It works. Let me be clear about that. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline is a real, functioning piece of infrastructure. Under normal conditions, it moves around 1.5 million barrels a day. When the threat level rises, the UAE can push more crude through it and reduce its dependence on the strait. But here is the number that matters. Hormuz moves 20 million barrels a day. This pipeline moves 1.5 million. That means even if you maxed it out completely and sent nothing else through the strait, you'd be replacing about 7.5% of the flow. That's not a bypass. That's a pressure valve on a fire hose. And when the crisis deepened in early 2026, something else became clear. Fujairah, the port where all that bypassed oil arrives, sits well within range of Iranian missiles and drone systems. You've moved the oil, but you haven't moved the vulnerability. You've just given it a new address. Attempt 2. The Saudi Red Sea pipeline. Saudi Arabia's answer was the East-West pipeline, running from its eastern province oil fields to the Yanbu export terminal on the Red Sea. Capacity of around 5 million barrels a day, though it rarely runs anywhere near full capacity. Again, it works. And again, the math is brutal. 5 million against 20 million. 1/4 of the flow, on a good day, assuming the Red Sea itself remains open, which, as the past 2 years of Houthi activity in that waterway have demonstrated, is not a guarantee. Attempt 3. The Musandam Canal. This is the one that captures people's imagination most. And for good reason. It is genuinely elegant on paper. Look at a map of the Omani Musandam Peninsula. It juts into the Strait of Hormuz like a stone wedge. In several places, the distance between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is less than 40 kilometers. Just 40 kilometers of land separating two bodies of water. The concept: dig a canal straight through. Ships bypass Hormuz entirely. Done. Here is what 40 kilometers of Musandam actually is. It's the Hajar Mountains, limestone peaks climbing above 2,000 meters, fractured rock riddled with cave systems, underground freshwater lenses, gradients that would make the Panama Canal engineers go pale. The Panama Canal cut through 77 kilometers of flat jungle. Musandam would require cutting through 32 kilometers of near, vertical mountain at a fraction of the altitude tolerance. The excavation volume alone, to create a channel wide enough and deep enough for modern supertankers, would be roughly 40 times the total excavation of the Panama Canal. Cost estimates range from 200 billion to figures engineers don't like saying in public. Construction timeline minimum 15 to 20 years. And that assumes Oman agrees, which it has not. Oman's development strategy for the Musandam region centers on tourism and maritime services, not bulldozing its mountains for a shipping corridor it doesn't control. Every attempt fails for the same categories of reason: too small, too expensive, too vulnerable, too politically complicated. But I want to push past those reasons, because they're real, but they're not the whole truth. Act 3, the real reason here is the part nobody says. The countries that would benefit most from a Hormuz bypass are the same countries that have the most to lose if one is ever successfully built. Think about what the Strait of Hormuz actually does for Gulf oil producers beyond just being a transit route. It is a risk multiplier. Every barrel of oil that moves through Hormuz carries an implicit premium, a price bonus that reflects the possibility, however small, that the strait could close. Traders call it the Hormuz Risk Premium. It's baked into global oil prices constantly. When tensions rise, it spikes. When an Iranian general makes a threatening statement, it moves markets within hours. When a tanker gets seized, it adds dollars per barrel almost immediately. This premium has been worth, conservatively, hundreds of billions of dollars to Gulf producers over the past 2 decades. Not because the strait actually closed, but because it might. Remove the Hormuz choke point permanently with a bypass. Remove the risk, remove the premium. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, they would be selling the same oil to the same buyers at permanently lower prices. The insurance on their most valuable economic weapon would have been canceled by their own infrastructure spending. There is a reason no Gulf state has ever seriously funded a canal proposal. There is a reason the UAE pipeline was built at a scale that helps but never replaces. There is a reason every bypass study ends up in a drawer. The threat of Hormuz closure is, for Gulf oil producers, one of the most valuable tools they possess. It gives them geopolitical leverage. It supports oil prices. It keeps the world, and specifically the United States and its allies, deeply invested in regional stability. A bypass doesn't just solve a logistics problem. It dissolves a leverage point. Now layer in the security reality. Even if a bypass were built, even if a canal cut through Musandam or a pipeline network expanded to match Hormuz volumes, global oil flow would now depend on a single artificial choke point instead of a natural one. A canal can be blocked by a grounded tanker. A pipeline can be struck by a missile. A port at the exit point can be destroyed. You haven't removed the vulnerability. You've centralized it into a custom-built target. The Hormuz Strait, for all its danger, has one feature a canal never will. It is wide enough, deep enough, and complex enough that closing it completely requires sustained military effort. A canal requires one precise strike at one precise location, which means a bypass, paradoxically, might make the world's oil supply more vulnerable, not less. And then there is the timeline problem. Any canal or major pipeline network of sufficient scale would take 15 to 20 years to build. The global energy transition is already underway. Solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles. The trajectory is clear even if the timeline is debated. The world that would use a Musandam Canal in 2045 will be moving significantly less oil than the world that would commission it in 2025. You are building a 200 billion solution to a problem that may be 30 to 40% smaller by the time the solution is ready. The economic case collapses under its own timeline. Act 4. What actually changes things? So is Hormuz permanent? Is this choke point just a fixture of global energy for the foreseeable future? Partially, yes. But 3 things can genuinely reduce the world's exposure to it, and none of them involve cutting through a mountain. The first is storage. The world's strategic petroleum reserves exist precisely for Hormuz disruptions. But most major economies hold 90 days of supply or less. Doubling that buffer would buy the world enough time to absorb a genuine closure without economic catastrophe. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make a good video thumbnail, but it works. The second is energy transition speed. Every electric vehicle sold reduces oil demand. Every solar panel installed reduces the price sensitivity to a Hormuz disruption. The bypass that actually matters isn't a canal in Oman. It's a kilowatt-hour replacing a barrel. The third is what the UAE is actually building at Fujairah. Not just a pipeline terminal, but a full-spectrum trading and logistics hub designed to make Fujairah valuable independent of what happens in the strait. Port capacity, free zones, refining capacity. The strategy isn't bypassing Hormuz with a pipe. It's making Fujairah important enough that the world protects it the same way it protects the strait. That is the only bypass strategy that doesn't require moving a mountain or dissolving a leverage point. Closing 4 countries. Are 312 billion. Every bypass attempt failing by design or by physics, or by the quiet self-interest of the people most motivated to build it. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a geographic problem. It is an economic arrangement, a leverage point that the countries who claim to fear it have learned to profit from. The bypass will not be built, not because of the mountains, not because of the cost, not because Oman won't sign the permits, because the threat is worth more than the solution. That is the uncomfortable truth at the center of every Hormuz bypass proposal. The choke point persists not despite the wealth and power of the countries around it, but partly because of it. Now I want to hear from you, because this is genuinely one of the most debated questions in energy geopolitics right now. Do you think Gulf states actually want a bypass built? Or is the threat of Hormuz closure the most valuable strategic weapon they have, and they know it? Drop your answer below. I read every comment. And if this changed how you think about it, share it with someone who still thinks this is just an engineering problem.